For centuries, the Indian subcontinent has produced some of the greatest experts in the Islamic sciences. In recent centuries, the Dars-i Niẓāmī curriculum has played a pivotal role in advancing the tradition of knowledge. This curriculum was established by the descendants of Hazrat Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who himself was from amongst the fuqaha and the qurra of the Sahaba alayhimur ridwan. The key figure in this development was Mullah Nizamuddin, the son of Mullah Qutbuddin al-Shaheed al-Ansari rahimahullah ta'ala, who compiled this Dars-i Niẓāmī curriculum. The word Dars-i Niẓāmī you hear all the time. He's the one who compiled this curriculum. And this curriculum then actively spread across all of the subcontinent. The curriculum was first taught in a building known as the Farangī Maḥall. This building was gifted to Nizamuddin and his brothers by the great Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb Alamgir rahimahullah ta'ala in the city of Lucknow in India. Mullah Nizamuddin and his brothers transformed this building into a center of knowledge, and the scholars who emerged from this tradition became known as the Farangī Maḥallis. In his book, The Last Mughal Emperor, William Dalrymple, he comments on the intellectual achievements of the Dars-i Niẓāmī curriculum, though he underplays the true significance of this curriculum. He says, the students at the madrasa were trained in philosophy, logic, and the sciences. And by the time they graduated, they would know as much about Aristotle and Plato as any graduate of Oxford. In reality, any Oxford graduate of that time would have certainly struggled to match the intellectual rigor of the giants of the Nizami tradition, with their deep commentaries, glosses, and groundbreaking research in the sciences. Initially, Dars-i Niẓāmī was not a curriculum, but a pedagogy, a method of learning and teaching that focused on developing intellectual depth. Specific books in various sciences were carefully selected for inclusion in the syllabus. After preparing a portion of a text, students would study it. And studying it meant researching the underlying principles that were implicitly contained and embodied in that passage. In other words, the text was an instrument, a means through which scholarly discussions, debates, and discourses would emerge. Mullah Nizamuddin included two of the most challenging texts in the syllabus. Why? Because if a student could study these difficult works properly, they would develop expertise and essential skills, enabling them to engage with the vast library of Muslim scholarship, extracting rulings and knowledge from any text. By mastering these books, students would gain expertise and develop essential skills. If they now wished, they could become students of Imam al-Razi by engaging with his works, or they could become disciples of Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi by studying his Fusus al-Hikam. Text and commentaries that offered excessive clarification were purposely excluded from the syllabus, and certain sections of books were left untaught, as the purpose was to develop a malaka and independence crucial skills, as opposed to simply completing a list of books in a syllabus. There are some parallels here with medieval Western education, where students embarked on the trivium, a classical framework aimed at cultivating clear thinking and effective communication. Similarly, Dars-i Niẓāmī, this famous Dars-i Niẓāmī, sought to refine the intellect through a deep engagement with the tools of learning that would aid them in accessing the tradition. A significant branch of this tradition flourished in Khairabad, which is in the district of Sitapur in Uttar Pradesh. One of the most famous figures of this tradition was Imam Fazl-i Haq Khairabadi rahimahullah ta'ala. The philosophy of Dars-i Niẓāmī was preserved by these Khairabadis, and it essentially, through them, it has reached us until today. Regarding the Khairabadi method and its characteristics, Mullah Sayyid Najmul Hasan Khairabadi says that the distinctive feature of the Khairabadi teacher's method is that they do not confine students within the four walls of the book. Instead, they instill the issues of the subject in such a way that the student develops the capacity for independent reasoning. The student does not remain a blind follower, but he analyzes everything with deep investigation. In contrast, other teachers would have the students read the text, they would provide a translation, and simultaneously explain the meaning. However, the teachers of Khairabad, after having the students read a portion of the text as necessary, would give a detailed explanation of the issue, ensuring that the student understands all aspects of the subject. Only after this would they provide the translation so that the student could also reconcile it with the text and resolve any complexities in the wording. This method was coupled with the rigorous preparation known as mutala'a and followed up by takrar, which was revision after class. This entire process was built up of 7 genius steps, which we don't have time to elaborate on here. Unfortunately, and I finish with this, with the advent of colonialism, this profound approach to Islamic education was disrupted. The introduction of modernity and unnecessary changes, often inspired by colonial methods, weakened the intellectual foundation of Dars-i Niẓāmī. Right up until the inception of colonialism, there was serious research and intellectual activity taking place. This is contrary to the misconception that there was a centuries-old decline in the Muslim world that eventually led to colonialism. No, this was not the case. After more than 200 years, after Muslims gained independence, there were calls for the revival of the sciences. However, many a time these approaches that were adopted for this revival were essentially colonial in nature, rooted in modernity and a misguided notion of progress. If we are to revive the religious sciences in the modern world, Muslims must reconnect with the pre-colonial chain of scholarship and build upon it. We cannot operate in a vacuum. We must take the knowledge passed down by our ancestors and build on it and further their work.
الحمد للمتوحد بجلاله المتفرد وصلاته